Why would a heart surgeon hand a secret envelope to my estranged father while I was being put under for a major operation? The moment I discovered what was inside, I realized just how far my father was willing to go to steal everything I'd built. By the time he opened that envelope, I was ready, and so was my revenge. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Medical Center's cardiac wing cast harsh shadows across my face as I lay on the pre-operative gurney. My name is Colin Mercer, and at 37, I was about to undergo the kind of heart surgery that makes you question every decision you've ever made. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, a man who'd built a multi-million-dollar tech company from nothing, reduced to wearing a hospital gown and trusting strangers with my life. "Just try to relax, Mr. Mercer," said the anesthesiologist, a kind-faced woman in her 50s. "We'll take good care of you." Standing beside my bed was my father, Roger Mercer, 62 years old and looking every inch the concerned parent he'd never actually been. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate despite the hospital setting. To the medical staff, he probably looked like a devoted father keeping vigil over his son. They didn't know that Roger had walked out on our family when I was 5 years old, leaving my mother Laura to raise me alone while he chased get-rich-quick schemes and younger women. "Don't worry, son," Roger said, placing a hand on my shoulder with practiced warmth. "I'll be here when you wake up. We can discuss those company matters you mentioned once you're feeling better." I wanted to tell him that I hadn't mentioned any company matters, that the only reason he'd suddenly reappeared in my life was because Mercer Innovations had become successful enough to attract his attention. But the pre-medication was making my thoughts fuzzy, and I needed to save my energy for the surgery ahead. Dr. Felix Warren, the cardiac surgeon, entered the pre-op area with his usual brisk efficiency. He was a man in his late 40s with steady hands and a reputation for excellence, exactly what you want when someone's about to crack open your chest. Roger straightened immediately, flashing that charming smile that had fooled so many people over the years. "Dr. Warren, thank you again for everything," Roger said, extending his hand. "I know Colin is in excellent hands." "Of course, Mr. Mercer," Dr. Warren replied, though something in his tone seemed slightly strained. "We'll take good care of him." As the anesthesiologist began preparing the IV, I heard Dr. Warren lean over to speak quietly to his surgical assistant, a young man in scrubs who'd been organizing instruments nearby. The words were barely a whisper, but in the relative quiet of the pre-op area, they cut through my drowsiness like a knife. "Give this envelope to his father later," Dr. Warren murmured, pressing something into the assistant's hand. "After the surgery is complete." My eyes snapped open, suddenly alert despite the medication coursing through my veins. An envelope? What envelope? Why was my surgeon passing secret messages to my father? I tried to turn my head to get a better look, but the anesthesiologist was already placing the mask over my face. "Wait," I mumbled through the mask, but my words were muffled and increasingly slurred. "What envelope?" "Shh, just breathe normally," the anesthesiologist said soothingly. "Everything's going to be fine." But everything wasn't fine. As consciousness slipped away, the last thing I saw was Roger's face hovering over me, that familiar calculating expression flickering across his features before being replaced by false concern. The last thing I heard was the steady beep of monitors and the rustle of paper as someone tucked something away. Hours later, I drifted back to consciousness in the cardiac recovery unit. The surgery had been successful, according to the nurses, but I felt like I'd been hit by a truck. My chest was wrapped in bandages, tubes snaked from various parts of my body, and every breath was a conscious effort. Through the haze of pain medication, I became aware of voices in the hallway outside my room. "He's going to be fine," I heard Dr. Warren saying. "The procedure went smoothly. He'll need several weeks of recovery, of course, but there shouldn't be any complications." "That's wonderful news," came Roger's voice, dripping with relief that sounded just a little too theatrical. "And the other matter we discussed?" "Everything's been handled as requested," Dr. Warren replied, though he sounded uncomfortable. "I hope you understand this was unusual." Through my partially open door, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corridor. A nurse, the same surgical assistant from the pre-op area, approached Roger with something in his hand. It was a thick manila envelope, the kind used for important documents. Roger accepted it with a nod, glancing around quickly before sliding it inside his jacket. "Thank you," Roger said quietly. "This means everything to the family business." "Family business? What family business?" Mercer Innovations was my company, built with relentless effort, sacrifice, and countless sleepless nights. Roger had contributed exactly nothing to its success, yet here he was, accepting mysterious envelopes and talking about family businesses while I lay recovering from surgery. My mother Laura appeared in the doorway, her face etched with worry and exhaustion. At 59, she still possessed the strength that had carried us through Roger's abandonment and the lean years that followed. She'd worked 2 jobs to put me through college, never once complaining about the burden Roger had left her to carry alone. "How is he?" she asked, moving to my bedside. "Awake," I managed to croak, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, taking my hand gently. "You gave us such a scare." Roger materialized beside her, the envelope now invisible beneath his jacket. "The important thing is that you're going to be fine," he said. "You just focus on getting better. Don't worry about anything else. Don't worry about anything else." The words echoed in my foggy, unfocused mind as I watched him carefully avoid my eyes. In my jacket pocket, my phone buzzed with a notification. Laura helped me retrieve it, and through the blur, I saw a calendar alert that sent a sharp chill through me despite the warm hospital room. Annual shareholders meeting in 6 days. 6 days. In 6 days, the board of directors of Mercer Innovations would convene for our annual meeting where major decisions about the company's future were made. 6 days while I lay here vulnerable and weak, while Roger walked around with mysterious envelopes and talked about family businesses that weren't his to claim. As visiting hours ended and my parents prepared to leave, I watched Roger's reflection in the window. He was checking his phone, typing messages, and there was something predatory in his posture that I recognized from my childhood. The same look he'd had when he was planning his next scheme, his next escape, his next betrayal. The envelope rustled softly against his jacket as he moved, and I knew with growing certainty that whatever was inside it wasn't meant for my benefit. After 32 years of Roger's absence and 5 years of his renewed presence in my life, I should have seen this coming. But lying there in that hospital bed, connected to machines and dependent on others for the most basic needs, I finally understood the true scope of his ambition. He wasn't here because he loved me or because he wanted to repair our relationship. He was here because he smelled opportunity, and my medical vulnerability had given him the opening he'd been waiting for. The envelope was just the beginning. 3 days into my recovery, as I sat propped up in my home office trying to work despite the persistent ache in my chest, the full weight of my history with Roger came crashing back. The pain medication made my thoughts drift, but it also stripped away the polite veneer I'd maintained for years, leaving me face to face with memories I'd tried to bury. I was 5 years old when Roger first disappeared from my life. One morning he was there, eating breakfast and promising to take me to the park after work. By evening, he was gone, along with the contents of my mother's savings account and her grandmother's jewelry. Laura found the note on the kitchen table. "I'm not cut out for this life. You're better off without me." For years I believed him. I thought we were better off without him, and in many ways, we were. Laura threw herself into raising me with a fierce determination that bordered on heroic. She worked as a secretary during the day and cleaned offices at night, her hands raw from industrial cleaning supplies, her eyes red from exhaustion. But she never missed a school play, never forgot a birthday, never made me feel like I was the reason Roger had left. "He didn't leave because of you," she would tell me when I asked why Daddy wasn't coming home. "Some people just don't know how to love what they have." I learned to stop asking. I learned to stop hoping for birthday cards or Christmas presents or phone calls that never came. I learned to be the man of the house at an age when other kids were still believing in Santa Claus. Most importantly, I learned that the only person I could truly depend on was myself. That lesson served me well through high school, where I discovered a talent for computers and programming that would eventually change my life. While other teenagers were dating and partying, I was building websites for local businesses and teaching myself coding languages that most adults had never heard of. The money I earned helped Laura pay the bills, and more importantly, it gave me a sense of purpose and control that I'd never experienced before. College was a struggle financially, but I earned scholarships and worked part-time jobs to cover what the financial aid didn't. Laura insisted on helping despite my protests, taking on extra cleaning contracts to send me care packages and cover my textbook costs. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in computer science and a burning desire to build something that could never be taken away from me. That's when Roger reappeared. I was 19, home for Christmas break during my sophomore year, when Laura answered a knock at the door. I heard her gasp, then silence, then the sound of muffled conversation. When I emerged from my room, there he was, older, grayer, but still possessing that easy charm that had once convinced my mother to marry him. "Colin," he said, as if 14 years hadn't passed between us. "Look at you. You've become quite the young man." I stared at him, this stranger who shared my last name and half my DNA, trying to reconcile the father I'd imagined with the reality standing in our living room. He looked successful. Expensive clothes, nice watch, confident posture. nothing like the desperate man who'd fled in the night all those years ago. "What do you want?" I asked, cutting straight through the pleasantries. Roger laughed, a sound that was probably meant to be charming but struck me as hollow. "Can't a father visit his son? I've been thinking about you both for years. I know I made mistakes, but I'm different now. I've learned from my errors." The next few hours were a masterclass in manipulation. Roger had prepared for this reunion, armed with explanations for his absence: depression, financial troubles, fear of being a burden, apologies that sounded rehearsed but sincere, and promises of a better future together. He'd done well for himself, he claimed, in real estate and investments. He wanted to make amends, to be the father he should have been all along. Laura, ever hopeful that people could change, welcomed him back cautiously. I remained skeptical, but I was young enough to want to believe that maybe, finally, I could have a normal family. Maybe Roger really had learned from his mistakes. Maybe this time would be different. It wasn't. Over the following years, Roger's pattern became clear to anyone paying attention. He would appear during my successes and disappear during my struggles. When I landed my first high-paying job after college, Roger was there to celebrate and suggest we go into business together. When I was laid off during the tech recession, his calls became infrequent and his visits stopped altogether. When I started Mercer Innovations in my garage with my life savings and a business plan that most people thought was crazy, Roger was nowhere to be found. But when my company landed its first major contract, when we moved into real office space, when we started making headlines in the business journals, suddenly Roger was back, full of pride and paternal wisdom. He'd always known I would succeed, he claimed. He'd always believed in me. "You get your business sense from me," he would tell people at company events, as if he'd been there for the 18-hour days and the months of living on ramen noodles. "The apple doesn't fall far from the tree." The worst part was how good he was at it. Roger could walk into a room and within minutes have everyone convinced that he was a devoted father who'd supported his son's entrepreneurial journey from the beginning. He had stories, carefully crafted half-truths about giving me my first computer. It was a used machine Laura had saved for months to buy. About teaching me about business. I'd learned everything from books and bitter experience. About the family legacy he was helping me build. There was no family legacy except the one I was creating myself. I tolerated it because Laura asked me to. She could see through Roger's act better than anyone, but she also remembered the young man she'd fallen in love with before life had hardened him into something else. She held on to hope that somewhere inside him was still the person who'd once promised to love her forever, and I couldn't bear to completely crush that hope. But tolerance and trust are different things, and I never made the mistake of trusting Roger with anything important. I kept him away from my business decisions, my financial information, and my long-term plans. When he offered advice, I listened politely and ignored it. When he suggested partnerships or investments, I deflected with vague promises to think about it. When he asked about company operations or future strategies, I gave him sanitized versions of the truth that satisfied his curiosity without revealing anything sensitive. This careful distance had worked for years, but now, sitting in my home office with bandages across my chest and Roger's mysterious envelope weighing on my mind, I realized I might have underestimated him. The man who'd once stolen from his own wife and abandoned his child wasn't above stealing from his son, especially when that son was temporarily vulnerable and worth considerably more than Laura's savings account had been. My phone buzzed with a text from my operations manager, Helena Meyer. "Your dad's been asking accounting weird questions. Should I worry?" I stared at the message, my chest tightening with something that had nothing to do with my surgical incisions. Helena was 34, sharp as a razor and fiercely protective of our company. She'd been with Mercer Innovations since we were small enough to fit in a single room, and she knew better than anyone how hard we'd worked to build what we had. If she was worried about Roger's questions, I should be terrified. I typed back, "What kind of questions?" Her response came quickly. "Access codes, banking info, board procedures. Says he's helping coordinate things while you recover. Seemed off." Seemed off. That was Helena's polite way of saying her instincts were screaming danger. I'd learned to trust those instincts implicitly over the years. They'd saved us from bad partnerships, problematic employees, and costly mistakes more times than I could count. I set the phone aside and leaned back in my chair, trying to process what I was learning. Roger wasn't just visiting his recovering son out of paternal concern. He was positioning himself, asking questions, gathering information. The envelope from Dr. Warren was part of something larger, something that had been planned while I was unconscious and vulnerable on an operating table. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own father was planning to steal my life's work while I was too weak to stop him. The man who'd already abandoned me once was preparing to rob me of everything I'd built in his absence. And he was doing it with the same charming smile and false concern that had fooled so many people over the years. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't a 5-year-old boy crying for a father who would never come home. I wasn't a 19-year-old desperate for approval and family connection. I was a successful businessman who'd survived and thrived despite Roger's absence, not because of his presence. And if he thought my temporary medical situation made me an easy target, he was about to learn just how wrong he could be. The war was coming, whether I wanted it or not. The only question was whether I'd be ready when the first shots were fired. By the 5th day of my recovery, Roger's sudden attentiveness had shifted from suspicious to suffocating. He appeared at my house every morning with coffee and pastries, stayed through the afternoon offering to help with business matters, and lingered into the evening discussing my health and recovery timeline with the kind of detailed interest that felt more like reconnaissance than concern. "You know, Colin," he said over dinner at Meridian, an upscale restaurant downtown that he'd insisted on despite my preference to eat at home. "You've been working too hard for too many years. Maybe this surgery is a blessing in disguise, a chance to step back and let others help carry the load." I picked at my salmon, my appetite diminished by both the pain medication and the growing certainty that this conversation had an agenda. "I appreciate the concern, but I've got everything under control." "Do you, though?" Roger leaned forward, his expression shifting to something that might have passed for fatherly worry if I hadn't known him better. "Helena mentioned you've been trying to work from home, but you're still recovering from major surgery. What if something happens to you? What if there are complications? Who's going to run Mercer Innovations if you're not able to?" The questions felt like probes, each one designed to map the vulnerabilities in my company's structure. "The business will be fine. I have excellent people in place." "But do you have the legal frameworks in place?" Roger pressed. "Power of attorney arrangements, succession planning. These are the kinds of things successful businessmen think about, especially after health scares like yours." I set down my fork and studied his face. "Why are you so interested in my succession planning?" Roger's smile never wavered, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Because I care about you, son. Because I've made enough mistakes in my life to recognize when someone I love might be making one too. You've built something incredible, but if you don't protect it properly, you could lose everything. Protect it from what? From uncertainty, from legal challenges, from the chaos that happens when successful people don't plan for contingencies." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "I know I wasn't there when you were building this company, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I'm here now, and I want to help you secure what you've worked so hard to create." The conversation continued for another hour, with Roger skillfully steering the discussion toward company shares, digital access codes, and the specific legal mechanisms that governed Mercer Innovations' operations. He asked about my passwords, my banking arrangements, and the bylaws that dictated how major decisions were made. Each question was wrapped in concern and presented as practical planning, but the cumulative effect felt like an interrogation. When we finally returned to my house, I excused myself to rest while Roger lingered in the living room, ostensibly reading but actually making phone calls in hushed tones. I caught fragments of conversation through my bedroom door, mentions of notaries, document preparation, and timeline concerns that seemed to revolve around the upcoming shareholders' meeting. The next morning, after Roger had left for what he claimed was a doctor's appointment of his own, I conducted a thorough search of my home office. What I discovered sent a sudden chill through me. My filing cabinet, which I always kept locked, showed signs of tampering. The folder containing Mercer Innovations' corporate bylaws was missing, along with several other documents related to company governance and ownership structure. More disturbing was what I found in my desk drawer, a business card for Westfield Notary Services with a handwritten note on the back. "Tuesday, 2 p.m., bring ID and power of attorney forms." Tuesday was tomorrow. The handwriting wasn't mine. I immediately called my lawyer and longtime friend, Dane Rutledge. We'd known each other since college, where he'd been the steady voice of reason that kept me from making the kinds of impulsive decisions that destroy promising careers. Now, at 41, he ran a successful practice specializing in corporate and family law, and he'd been instrumental in structuring Mercer Innovations' legal foundation. "Colin, you sound terrible," he said when he answered the phone. "How are you feeling?" "Physically, I'm healing. Legally, I think I might be in trouble." I explained the situation, the mysterious envelope, Roger's probing questions, the missing documents, and the notary appointment I'd never scheduled. Dane's response was immediate and alarming. "We need to meet. Today. And Colin, don't sign anything, don't give anyone your passwords, and don't let Roger anywhere near your office or your bank accounts." 3 hours later, I sat across from Dane in his law firm's conference room, my chest aching from the effort of getting dressed and driving across town. Dane had pulled my corporate files and spread them across the mahogany table, his expression growing darker as he reviewed the documents. "This is worse than I thought," he said finally. "Your company's bylaws have a provision for emergency succession in case of medical incapacity. It was standard language that we included years ago, but in the wrong hands, it could be weaponized." "What do you mean?" "If someone could prove that you're medically unable to fulfill your duties as CEO, and if they had proper documentation showing power of attorney or guardianship rights, they could potentially assume control of your company until you're declared fit to resume your responsibilities." The room seemed to spin around me. "But Roger doesn't have power of attorney. He's not my guardian. He has no legal authority over me or my company." "Not yet," Dane said grimly. "But if he's meeting with notaries and asking about your passwords and banking information, he might be planning to create that authority. Forged documents, fraudulent power of attorney forms, fake medical assessments. There are ways to manufacture legal standing, especially when the target is temporarily vulnerable." "How is that possible? I'm conscious, coherent, and capable of making my own decisions. But you're also recovering from major surgery, taking pain medication, and working from home instead of maintaining your normal business routine. In the right courtroom, with the right documentation, someone could argue that you're not currently capable of managing a multi-million-dollar company." I felt sick, and it had nothing to do with my medication. "What can we do?" "First, we secure everything. I'll draft new power of attorney documents that explicitly exclude Roger from any decision-making authority. We'll also create ironclad medical directives that specify exactly who can and cannot make determinations about your mental capacity. And second, we watch him. We document everything he does, every conversation he has, every document he tries to access. If Roger is planning what I think he's planning, he'll need to move quickly. The shareholders' meeting is in 2 days, and that would be the perfect venue for him to present whatever fraudulent authority he's manufactured." That evening, I called Helena and asked her to quietly monitor all access to our corporate systems. I also requested copies of any communications Roger had made with our staff, our bank, or our board members. What she sent me an hour later confirmed my worst fears. Roger had been busy. He'd contacted our bank asking about procedures for emergency account access. He'd called our corporate lawyer inquiring about board meeting protocols. He'd even reached out to several board members, ostensibly to update them on my health, but actually to plant seeds of doubt about my ability to continue leading the company. Most damning of all was an email thread Helena had discovered in our system's logs. Someone using my digital signature had authorized the preparation of documents transferring temporary control of Mercer Innovations to Roger Mercer, in the event of medical incapacity or emergency succession needs. The signature looked perfect, but I'd never sent that email or authorized those documents. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. My own father had forged my signature to steal my company. He'd used my medical vulnerability as an opportunity to execute a plan that had probably been months in the making. The envelope from Dr. Warren likely contained medical documentation that Roger planned to use to support his claim that I was unfit to run my own business. The man who'd abandoned me as a child was now trying to rob me as an adult, and he was doing it with the same calculating precision that had once convinced my mother to trust him with her savings account. But this time, the stakes were infinitely higher. This time, he wasn't just stealing money, he was trying to steal my entire life's work. As I sat in my home office, surrounded by evidence of his betrayal, I realized that Roger had made one crucial miscalculation. He'd assumed that my temporary physical weakness meant I was helpless. He'd forgotten that I'd spent 32 years learning to survive and thrive without him, and that the skills I'd developed in his absence were more than enough to destroy whatever scheme he'd constructed in my temporary vulnerability. The war was no longer coming. It had already begun. And Roger was about to discover that the son he'd abandoned had grown into a man he couldn't manipulate, intimidate, or steal from. The only question now was how much collateral damage there would be when his carefully constructed plan collapsed around him. The day before the emergency board meeting, I moved through my preparations with the methodical precision that had built my company from a garage startup into an industry leader. Despite the persistent ache in my chest and the fog of pain medication, my mind was crystalline in its focus. Roger had made his moves. Now it was time to make mine. Dane arrived at my house at 7 a.m, carrying a briefcase full of legal documents and a laptop loaded with digital forensics software. Over the past 24 hours, he'd been working with a team of investigators to trace every aspect of Roger's scheme, and what they'd uncovered was both comprehensive and damning. "Your father has been planning this for months," Dane said, spreading printouts across my dining room table. "We've tracked communications going back to before your surgery was even scheduled. He's been building relationships with your staff, researching your company's legal structure, and positioning himself as your concerned next of kin with various institutions." I studied the evidence, my anger growing with each revelation. Phone records showed Roger had been in contact with Dr. Warren weeks before my surgery, not to discuss my medical care, but to arrange for the delivery of fabricated documents. Bank records revealed multiple attempts to access Mercer Innovations accounts using forged authorization forms. Most disturbing of all were the communications between Roger and a document preparation service that specialized in what they euphemistically called emergency succession planning. "He's been telling people that you're mentally impaired from the surgery," Dane continued. "Claims that the anesthesia and pain medication have left you unable to make sound business decisions. He's even got a fake psychological evaluation stating that you're suffering from post-surgical depression and cognitive decline." From a real psychologist? Dr. Marcus Thornfield. He's been disciplined twice by the state board for questionable practices, but he's still licensed. Roger paid him $5,000 for an assessment of someone he's never actually examined. I picked up the forged psychological report, scanning the clinical language that painted me as a man broken by medical trauma and unable to fulfill my responsibilities as CEO. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, detailed enough to sound credible, vague enough to avoid specific claims that could be easily disproven, and devastating enough to justify emergency intervention. "What about the envelope from Dr. Warren?" Dane's expression darkened. "That contained a fabricated medical opinion stating that your surgery had complications that affected your cognitive function. Warren claims Roger pressured him into delivering it by threatening to file malpractice suits and destroy his reputation. Warren's not innocent in this, but he's more of a coward than a co-conspirator. We spent the next several hours organizing our counter-evidence. Helena had provided comprehensive logs of every system access, every email, and every phone call related to company business over the past month. The digital trail clearly showed that while I'd been working from home, my decision-making had remained sharp and my leadership effective. More importantly, it revealed the exact moments when Roger had attempted to access systems he had no authorization to use. He tried to transfer money yesterday, Helena reported during our video call. $200,000 from the operating account to a personal account he'd opened in both your names. The bank flagged it as suspicious because the signature didn't match their records, but he came very close to succeeding. How close? The transfer was approved by the first-level clerk. It was only stopped when it reached the manager level for final authorization. If it had been a smaller amount, it would have gone through automatically. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with my medical condition. Roger wasn't just planning to steal my company, he was already stealing from it. The man who'd robbed my mother's savings account 32 years ago was now attempting to rob my corporate accounts, and he'd nearly succeeded. "We need to move fast," I told Dane. "If he's willing to commit outright theft, there's no telling what else he might try before the board meeting." Dane nodded grimly. "I've already filed for emergency injunctions to freeze any financial transactions involving your accounts. I've also prepared criminal complaints for forgery, fraud, and attempted theft. But Colin, once we trigger this, there's no going back. Your father will face serious criminal charges." I thought about that for a moment, weighing the implications. Roger would likely go to prison if we pursued this to its logical conclusion. My mother would be devastated. The family she'd tried to rebuild would be destroyed permanently, but the alternative was allowing him to steal everything I'd worked for, and I couldn't do that. "He made his choice when he forged my signature," I said finally. "I'm just responding to it." That afternoon, I drove to Mercer Innovations headquarters for the first time since my surgery. The familiar sight of our building, a gleaming steel and glass structure that bore my name and housed my dreams, filled me with renewed determination. This was what Roger was trying to steal. This was what I had to protect. Helena met me in the lobby, her expression a mixture of concern and fierce loyalty. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "You should be home resting." "I'll rest when this is over. What's our status?" "All systems are secure. I've changed every access code and password Roger might have obtained. I've also briefed the entire staff on the situation. They know not to provide any information to anyone claiming to represent you without direct authorization from you personally." We rode the elevator to the executive floor, where I could see my company functioning exactly as it should despite my absence. The work continued, the projects advanced, the revenue flowed. Roger's claims about my indispensability were as false as everything else about his scheme. Mercer Innovations was strong enough to survive my temporary medical leave, which meant it was certainly strong enough to survive his attempted coup. In my office, I found evidence of Roger's visits over the past week. My desk had been searched, my files examined, my computer accessed using what must have been sophisticated password-cracking software. He'd been thorough and careful, but not careful enough. Security cameras had recorded his every move, and digital logs had tracked his every attempt to breach our systems. "He was here for 3 hours yesterday," Helena reported. "Told security he was picking up some papers for you. By the time I found out, he'd already gone through half your filing cabinets. What was he looking for? Ownership documents, board resolutions, anything that might give him leverage in a legal challenge. He also copied files from your computer, financial projections, strategic plans, personnel records. I think he was building a case that the company needs stronger leadership. The audacity was breathtaking. Roger was simultaneously arguing that I was mentally unfit to run my company while stealing my strategic plans to demonstrate his own fitness to replace me. He was trying to have it both ways, claiming I was incompetent while appropriating my competence for his own use. That evening, I met with each board member individually, explaining the situation and providing them with evidence of Roger's scheme. Their reactions ranged from shock to outrage, but all of them were unequivocal in their support. These were successful business leaders who'd invested in Mercer Innovations because they believed in my vision and leadership. They weren't about to let a manipulative father steal what they had helped build. "This is unconscionable," said Victoria Ashworth, our longest-serving board member. "I've known you for 8 years, Colin. I've seen you navigate crises, make tough decisions, and lead this company through challenges that would have destroyed weaker leaders. Anyone who thinks you're mentally unfit is either lying or delusional." "What do you need from us?" asked Thomas Blackwood, our newest board member. "Just be ready for tomorrow. Roger will likely present his forged documents and fake medical assessments. He'll claim that emergency action is needed to save the company from my supposed incompetence. I need you all to be prepared to reject his claims and support the evidence we've gathered." "Consider it done," Victoria said firmly. "And Colin, after we deal with this tomorrow, we should discuss criminal charges. What your father is attempting isn't just unethical, it's illegal. He needs to face consequences." As I drove home that night, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. The evidence was overwhelming, the legal framework was solid, and the board was united in opposition to Roger's scheme. Everything was in place for tomorrow's confrontation. But there was one more conversation I needed to have. One more person who needed to know the truth before the final battle began. My mother had spent 37 years trying to protect me from Roger's worst impulses, and she deserved to know that her efforts had ultimately failed. She deserved to know that the man she'd welcomed back into our lives was the same selfish manipulator who'd abandoned us decades ago. The hardest part of tomorrow wouldn't be defeating Roger's scheme. It would be watching my mother's heart break all over again when she realized that some people really don't change, no matter how much we want them to. The night before the emergency board meeting, I sat across from my mother in her living room, the same room where Roger had reappeared when I was 19, where he'd made promises he never kept, where she'd chosen hope over experience time and again. Laura looked older than her 59 years, worn down by a week of worry about my health and confusion about the growing tension between Roger and me. "You're scaring me," she said after I'd explained why I'd asked her to sit down. "What's this about, Colin?" I'd rehearsed this conversation in my head dozens of times, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt inadequate. How do you tell your mother that the man she'd loved enough to marry, forgive, and welcome back is planning to destroy her son? How do you shatter 37 years of hope with evidence of betrayal so profound it defied comprehension? "Mom, I need to show you something. It's going to be difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth about Roger." I opened my laptop and began walking her through the evidence Dane and I had compiled. The forged signatures, the fake medical assessments, the attempted theft, the systematic deception that had been unfolding while I lay recovering from surgery. With each revelation, Laura's face grew paler, her hands trembling as she processed the magnitude of Roger's betrayal. "This can't be right," she whispered, staring at copies of the forged documents. He's changed, Colin. People can change." "Look at the signature," I said gently, pointing to the authorization form Roger had fabricated. "Look at the date. I was unconscious in surgery when this was supposedly signed. He forged my name while I was on an operating table, Mom." Laura studied the document, her eyes filling with tears as the undeniable truth sank in. "But why? Why would he do this to you? To us?" "Because it's who he's always been. The man who stole your savings and abandoned us 32 years ago is the same man who's trying to steal my company now. The only difference is the scale of the theft." We sat in silence for several minutes while Laura absorbed the evidence. I could see the war playing out behind her eyes, the mother's instinct to protect her child battling against the wife's desperate hope that her husband could be redeemed. Finally, she looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Cold, hard resolve. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Nothing. Just be prepared for what's going to happen tomorrow. When this comes out, when the board sees this evidence, Roger's going to face serious consequences. Criminal charges, probably prison time. I need you to know that I tried to find another way, but he's left me no choice." Laura reached across the coffee table and took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Colin, you listen to me. I brought that man back into our lives, and I'm the one who's been making excuses for him all these years. If he's planning to hurt you, to steal what you've worked for, then he's not the man I thought he was. He's not the man I hoped he could become." "Mom? No, let me finish. You've been protecting me from the truth about Roger for years, haven't you? Making excuses, tolerating his presence, letting him take credit for your success because you knew it would hurt me to see him for what he really is." I started to deny it, but she held up her hand. "I'm not blind, sweetheart. I've seen the way you tense up when he's around, the way you change the subject when he starts talking about the family business. I told myself it was just old resentments, father-son friction that would heal with time. But it wasn't, was it? You could see what I refused to see." "I wanted to be wrong about him," I admitted. "For your sake, I wanted to believe he'd changed." "Well, now we both know the truth." Laura's voice was steady, but tears were streaming down her face. "And tomorrow, when you expose what he's done, you'll have my full support. Whatever consequences he faces, he's earned them." I spent the rest of the evening at Laura's house, helping her process the emotional earthquake that was reshaping her understanding of the past 5 years. We talked about the signs she'd missed, the red flags she'd rationalized away, the gut instincts she'd ignored in favor of hope. By the time I left, she was angry rather than heartbroken, and that anger would serve her well in the confrontation to come. Back at my house, I found Dane waiting in my driveway with a briefcase full of final preparations. We spent 2 hours reviewing our strategy for the board meeting, organizing exhibits, and preparing for every possible argument Roger might make. The evidence was overwhelming, but Roger was a skilled manipulator who'd been planning this scheme for months. We couldn't afford to underestimate him. "Are you sure you're physically up for this?" Dane asked as we finished our preparations. "You're still recovering from major surgery, and tomorrow is going to be emotionally brutal." "I'm sure. This ends tomorrow, one way or another. And if Roger tries to turn this into a family reconciliation drama, if he claims he was just trying to help, that his motives were pure, then we let the evidence speak for itself. Forged signatures don't lie, Dane. Attempted theft isn't a misunderstanding. Whatever story Roger tells tomorrow, the facts will destroy it." That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my chest aching from more than just surgical incisions. Tomorrow would mark the end of any possibility of a relationship with my father, the final destruction of Laura's hopes for family reconciliation, and the beginning of a legal process that would likely send Roger to prison. There was no satisfaction in that knowledge, only a grim determination to protect what I'd built from the man who'd already taken too much from our family. But there was also something else, a strange sense of liberation. For 5 years, I'd been walking on eggshells around Roger, trying to maintain family peace while protecting my business interests. I'd been playing defense, reacting to his moves instead of making my own. Tomorrow, that would change. Tomorrow I would go on the offensive, and Roger would discover that the son he'd abandoned had grown into a man capable of fighting back. The alarm went off at 6 a.m., though I'd been awake for hours. I showered, dressed in my best suit, and prepared for what would either be the salvation or destruction of everything I'd worked to build. The board meeting was scheduled for 9 a.m. in our main conference room, with all directors present and legal counsel in attendance. As I drove to the office, I thought about the 5-year-old boy who'd cried himself to sleep, wondering why his daddy had left. That boy had grown up believing he wasn't worth staying for, that something about him had driven his father away. Today, that boy would finally get his answer. Roger hadn't left because his son wasn't worth loving. He'd left because he wasn't capable of loving anyone more than he loved himself. The parking lot at Mercer Innovations was fuller than usual for a Saturday morning. Board members, legal counsel, and key staff had all assembled for what everyone knew would be a pivotal moment in the company's history. Through the glass doors, I could see Roger already in the conference room, looking confident and relaxed as he chatted with Dr. Warren and a man I didn't recognize, probably the lawyer he'd hired to help execute his scheme. Helena met me at the elevator, her expression fierce with protective loyalty. "Everything's ready," she said. "Security footage, digital logs, financial records. It's all loaded and ready to present. The board members have been briefed, and Dane's already in the conference room setting up." "How does Roger seem?" "Confident. Arrogant, even. He's been telling people that today's meeting is just a formality, that the board will obviously support emergency succession given your medical condition. I don't think he realizes what's coming." As the elevator rose toward the executive floor, I felt a calm settle over me that I recognized from other pivotal moments in my business career. It was the feeling I got when all the preparation was done, when the strategy was set, when the only thing left was execution. Roger had spent months planning his scheme, but I'd spent a lifetime learning how to fight for what was mine. The conference room doors came into view, and through the glass, I could see the assembled crowd waiting for the final act of a drama that had been building for 37 years. Roger sat at the head of the table, my seat, with his forged documents spread before him and his confident smile firmly in place. He looked like a man who'd already won, who was just waiting for the formalities to be completed. In a few minutes, that confidence would be shattered. In a few minutes, the son he'd abandoned would show him exactly what he'd missed during those 32 years of absence. In a few minutes, Roger Mercer would discover that stealing from Colin Mercer was the biggest mistake of his worthless life. I straightened my tie, checked my watch, and walked toward the conference room where my father's scheme would collapse and my company would be saved. The boy who'd cried for his daddy was gone forever. In his place stood a man ready to destroy anyone who threatened what he'd built, even if that person happened to share his DNA. The conference room fell silent as I entered, every eye turning toward me with expressions ranging from concern to curiosity to barely concealed anticipation. Roger sat in my chair at the head of the mahogany table, his expensive suit immaculate and his silver hair perfectly styled. Before him lay a manila envelope, the same one I'd seen Dr. Warren's assistant hand him in the hospital corridor, along with what appeared to be official legal documents. "Colin," Roger said, rising with a practiced smile of paternal concern, "you shouldn't have come. You need to be resting, recovering. That's exactly why we're here today, to ensure the company is properly managed while you focus on your health." I took my place at the opposite end of the table, Dane beside me with our own stack of documents. The board members, Victoria Ashworth, Thomas Blackwood, and the others who'd helped build Mercer Innovations into what it was today, watched with careful attention. Dr. Warren sat uncomfortably in a corner chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone. The stranger I'd noticed earlier was indeed Roger's attorney, a thin man with nervous energy who kept checking his watch. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," I began, my voice steady despite the pain medication and the emotional weight of what was about to unfold. "I know this is unusual, but recent events have made this meeting necessary." "Colin, please," Roger interrupted, his tone dripping with false concern. "You're clearly not well. The surgery, the medications, they've affected your judgment. That's why I've asked Dr. Warren to provide the board with a medical assessment, and why I've prepared the necessary documentation to assume temporary leadership of the company." He gestured to the envelope before him. "I have here Dr. Warren's professional opinion regarding your current mental state, as well as properly notarized power of attorney documents that will allow me to guide Mercer Innovations through this difficult period. I know this is hard to accept, but sometimes family has to make difficult decisions for the good of everyone involved." The performance was masterful. Concerned father protecting his impaired son while reluctantly accepting the burden of leadership. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have been impressed by the sheer audacity of it. "That's interesting," I said calmly. "Before we review your documents, I'd like to share some information with the board that I think they'll find relevant." I nodded to Dane, who activated the large monitor at the far end of the room. Immediately, security footage appeared, showing Roger in my office 3 days earlier, systematically searching through my files and copying data from my computer. "This is from our building's security system," I explained, as the board watched Roger's image moving through my private office. "The timestamp shows this was taken while I was at home recovering from surgery, during a time when Roger told building security he was picking up papers I had requested." Roger's confident expression flickered for just a moment. "I was gathering documents you asked me to retrieve. You were too weak to come to the office yourself." "Really? Which documents did I ask you to retrieve?" I gestured to Dane, who clicked to the next exhibit. "Because according to our digital logs, you accessed my computer and copied files containing strategic plans, financial projections, and personnel records. You also attempted to access our corporate bank accounts using forged authorization forms." The evidence appeared on screen, clear records of every file Roger had accessed, every system he'd attempted to breach, every fraudulent document he'd tried to use. The board members leaned forward, their expressions shifting from confusion to alarm. "This is a misunderstanding," Roger said, but his voice had lost some of its smooth confidence. "I was simply trying to understand the business so I could help manage it during your recovery." "Help manage it?" I stood slowly, the pain in my chest sharp but manageable. "Is that what you call forging my signature on transfer documents? Is that what you call creating fake power of attorney forms? Is that what you call attempting to steal $200,000 from our operating account?" Dane clicked through the exhibits methodically. Bank records showing Roger's attempted theft, copies of the forged documents bearing my fabricated signature, communication records proving he'd been planning this scheme for months. With each revelation, Roger's composure cracked a little more. The signature analysis is particularly interesting, Dane said, his lawyer's voice cutting through the stunned silence. We had 3 independent handwriting experts examine the documents Roger submitted to various institutions. All 3 concluded that the signatures were forgeries, and quite poor ones at that. Dr. Warren shifted uncomfortably in his corner chair. Roger's attorney was frantically taking notes, probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this disaster. And then there's this, I said, gesturing for Dane to display the fake psychological evaluation. A mental health assessment claiming I'm suffering from post-surgical cognitive decline, signed by Dr. Marcus Thornfield. Dr. Thornfield, who has never examined me, never spoken to me, and who was paid $5,000 by Roger to produce this fraudulent document. Victoria Ashworth's face was stone cold with fury. "Mr. Mercer," she said, addressing Roger with icy formality, "are you telling this board that you attempted to steal control of this company using forged documents and fabricated medical assessments?" Roger's mask finally slipped completely. The charming, concerned father disappeared, replaced by the desperate schemer I'd always known him to be. "You don't understand," he said, his voice rising. "Colin's not thinking clearly. The surgery, the stress, he's making mistakes. I was trying to protect the company, protect all of your investments." "By forging his signature?" Thomas Blackwood demanded. "By stealing company funds? By lying to medical professionals and legal authorities?" "I built this company as much as he did," Roger exploded, abandoning all pretense. "I gave him the business sense, the drive, the ambition that made this possible. I deserve to have a say in how it's run." The silence that followed was deafening. Every person in that room knew the truth, that Roger had contributed nothing to Mercer Innovations except obstacles and interference. His claim of ownership was as fraudulent as his forged documents. "You built nothing," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "You abandoned me when I was 5 years old. You stole my mother's savings and disappeared for 14 years. You contributed nothing to this company except unwanted advice and constant attempts to take credit for other people's work." I walked slowly around the table, my eyes never leaving his face. "And now, while I was unconscious on an operating table having my chest cracked open to save my life, you were plotting to steal everything I've built in your absence. You forged my signature, fabricated medical documents, and attempted to rob my company while I was too weak to stop you." Laura appeared in the doorway, having arrived exactly when we'd planned. Her face was set in an expression of cold determination I'd never seen before. "Hello, Roger," she said, stepping into the room. "I've been listening from the hallway. I wanted to hear you explain how stealing from our son was somehow for his own good." Roger's face went white. "Laura, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She moved to stand beside my chair, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. "I understand that the man I welcomed back into our home, the man I forgave for 37 years of abandonment, has been planning to destroy our son while pretending to care about his recovery." She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick manila envelope, the same one Roger had received from Dr. Warren's assistant. "I found this in your jacket pocket this morning, along with copies of all the forged documents, the fake medical assessments, and a timeline showing you've been planning this theft since before Colin's surgery was even scheduled." Roger lunged for the envelope, but Laura stepped back, holding it out of his reach. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you think I'd just let you steal from my son the same way you stole from me 32 years ago?" The board members were staring in horrified fascination as the family drama played out before them. Dr. Warren looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. Roger's attorney was already packing his briefcase. "The contents of that envelope are particularly damning," Dane said, accepting it from Laura and opening it for the board to see. "It contains Dr. Warren's original, accurate medical report, stating that Colin's surgery was completely successful with no complications affecting his cognitive function. It also contains a letter from Roger to Dr. Warren threatening malpractice suits and professional destruction if the doctor didn't cooperate with his scheme." Dr. Warren finally found his voice. "He said he'd ruin my career if I didn't help him. He claimed Colin had asked him to handle his business affairs during recovery, and that the medical documentation was just a formality. I never intended—" "You never intended to get caught," I interrupted. "But you were willing to fabricate medical opinions and participate in fraud as long as you thought you could get away with it." The room erupted in overlapping conversations as board members demanded explanations, Roger's attorney tried to minimize his client's exposure, and Dr. Warren attempted to shift blame. Through it all, Roger sat in my chair, the chair he'd tried to steal, staring at the wreckage of his scheme with the expression of a man watching his life collapse in real time. "The criminal complaints have already been filed," Dane announced, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Forgery, fraud, attempted theft, conspiracy. The district attorney's office will be issuing warrants within the hour." "You can't do this to me," Roger said, finally finding his voice. "I'm your father." "No," I replied, my voice calm and final. "A father is someone who stays. A father is someone who builds up his child instead of tearing him down. A father is someone who protects his family instead of stealing from them. You're just a man who shares my DNA and has spent 37 years proving he's incapable of love, loyalty, or basic human decency." Laura stepped forward, her voice ringing with authority. "Roger Mercer, you are no longer welcome in my home, in my life, or anywhere near my son. Security will escort you from this building, and if you ever contact either of us again, we'll file for a restraining order." "The board's position is unanimous," Victoria Ashworth declared. "Mr. Roger Mercer is permanently banned from these premises and from any involvement with Mercer Innovations. Colin, you have our complete support and will cooperate fully with law enforcement in prosecuting this attempted theft." Security guards appeared in the doorway. I'd asked Helena to have them standing by. Roger looked around the room desperately, searching for an ally, a friendly face, anyone who might help him salvage something from this disaster. He found nothing but cold stares and obvious disgust. As the guards approached, Roger stood slowly, the manila envelope still clutched in his trembling hand. For a moment, he looked like the broken man he'd always been beneath the charming facade, desperate, pathetic, and utterly alone. "Colin," he said, his voice cracking, "thought I'm your father." "You were never my father," I replied. "You were just the man who taught me that I could survive anything, including you." Laura turned her back on him as security took his arms. The board members watched in silence as the man who'd tried to steal their company was led away like the common criminal he'd always been. Roger stopped at the door, the damning envelope in his hand, and looked back one final time at the son he'd abandoned, the woman he'd betrayed, and the boardroom that would never be his. Then he was gone, and the room fell completely silent,